You are going to die. Not someday, in theory. Actually, one moment you will be here, and the next you won't. And here's the strange part. In that moment, something happens that science still cannot fully explain. People who have been clinically dead, no heartbeat, no brain activity, nothing, have come back describing the same thing: a tunnel, a light, their entire life, replayed in seconds. Deceased relatives, waiting. So what actually happens after you stop? Is it nothing, or is it something? It is the only question every human being who has ever lived has asked. And it is the only question that nobody who has found the answer has ever come back to confirm. What happens after you die is not a question with one answer. It has several. And depending on which framework you use, religious, philosophical, scientific, or neurological, the answers are not just different. They are incompatible. And each one, in its own way, is stranger than the last. Let's start with what we actually know, not what we believe, not what we hope, what the science can confirm. The moment your heart stops beating, your cells begin to die. Not all at once, in stages. Your brain, which consumes roughly 20% of your body's oxygen, begins to deteriorate within 4 to 6 minutes of losing blood flow. Within hours, the process of decomposition begins. Within days, the body has started to return to the chemical compounds it was made of. Within years, in most conditions, almost nothing recognizable remains. This is what happens to the body. But the question most people are actually asking is not about the body. It is about the experience, about consciousness, about whether there is something it feels like to stop existing, and if so, what that something is. And here is where science runs directly into its hardest wall. Consciousness, the felt experience of being you, right now, reading these words, is one of the most studied and least understood phenomena in all of science. Philosophers call it the hard problem. We can describe what the brain does. We can map which regions activate when you feel pain, or joy, or fear. But we cannot explain why any of that physical activity produces a subjective experience, why there is something it is like to be you, rather than nothing at all. This matters enormously for the question of what happens after death, because if consciousness is entirely produced by the brain, if it is nothing more than the output of a sufficiently complex biological machine, then when the machine stops, the experience stops. There is no after. There is simply the end of the before. This is the position most neuroscientists hold, and it is not a comfortable one, because it means that the rich, vivid, continuous experience you are having right now, the sense of being a self with a history and a future, is a temporary phenomenon produced by approximately 3 pounds of tissue inside your skull. And when that tissue fails, you do not go somewhere. You simply stop being the kind of thing that goes anywhere. But here is where it gets more complicated, because not everyone who has come close to death reports nothing. Some report something, and what they report is consistent enough across cultures, across centuries, and across individuals who had no knowledge of each other's experiences, that it has become one of the most studied and contested areas in modern medicine. Near-death experiences, the tunnel of light, the feeling of leaving the body, the review of one's entire life in an instant, the overwhelming sense of peace, the encounter with deceased relatives, the reluctance to return. Cardiologist Pim van Lommel conducted one of the most rigorous studies of near-death experiences ever published, following 344 cardiac arrest patients who were clinically dead, no heartbeat, no brain activity, for varying periods before being resuscitated. 18% reported some form of conscious experience during the period when, by every medical measure, they should have been experiencing nothing at all. Van Lommel's conclusion, which he published in The Lancet, one of the world's most respected medical journals, was not that he had proven an afterlife. It was that the current scientific model, consciousness as purely a product of brain activity, could not fully explain what his patients reported. The experiences happen during documented periods of flat brain activity, which means either the experiences were somehow encoded and retrieved without active brain function, which would require a radical revision of what we understand about memory and consciousness, or something else was happening that current science cannot account for. This is not fringe thinking. This is a question being seriously debated in peer-reviewed literature by researchers at Oxford, at Harvard, at the University of Virginia, which has maintained a research division specifically dedicated to studying consciousness and survival for decades. What that something else might be is where the frameworks diverge completely. Religious traditions across the world have answered this question for thousands of years. Christianity offers resurrection, the body and soul reunited in a final judgment. Islam describes barzakh, an intermediate state between death and resurrection. Hinduism and Buddhism propose reincarnation, consciousness cycling through successive lives shaped by karma. Many indigenous traditions describe the dead as continuing presences in the living world, not gone but transformed. These are not primitive guesses. They are sophisticated frameworks developed over millennia, each one addressing the same fundamental human experience: the loss of someone you love, the awareness of your own mortality, the need to make the ending mean something, with different but internally coherent answers. What science cannot do is test them directly, and what religion cannot do, by its own definition, is provide the kind of evidence science requires. But there is a third framework that most people don't consider, and it comes from physics rather than medicine or theology. The law of conservation of energy states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change form. Your body, at the moment of death, contains energy. That energy does not vanish. It transforms into heat, into chemical reactions, into the ecosystem around you, into the atoms that will eventually become part of something else entirely. You will, in a very literal physical sense, persist, not as you, but as the matter and energy that used to be you, distributed back into the universe you came from. Physicist Sean Carroll has written about this with characteristic directness. The laws of physics, as we currently understand them, leave no room for a soul that survives bodily death in the traditional sense. There is no known mechanism by which the specific pattern of information that constitutes your consciousness could survive the dissolution of the physical substrate that produces it. But physicist Roger Penrose has proposed something more radical, that consciousness itself may be a quantum phenomenon, arising from processes in the brain that operate at the level of quantum mechanics rather than classical physics. If consciousness is quantum in nature, then the rules that govern its existence and persistence may be fundamentally different from the rules that govern the biological tissue it currently inhabits. This is speculative. Penrose himself would say so. But it opens a door that purely classical physics keeps closed. So where does this leave you? With the honest answer, which is that nobody knows. Not really. The most eminent neuroscientists, the most rigorous cardiologists, the most serious physicists, the oldest religious traditions, none of them agree. And the one source of information that would settle the question permanently is, by definition, unavailable to anyone currently capable of reporting it. What we do know is this: the question itself is not going anywhere. Every generation that has ever lived has faced it. Every culture that has ever existed has answered it differently. And the answers have shaped everything: how people live, what they value, what they are willing to sacrifice, and what they are willing to endure. There is something worth sitting with in the fact that a species capable of landing on the moon, mapping the human genome, and building machines that can think, still cannot answer the question that a child asks at the funeral of a grandparent. What happened to them? We are still working on it. Maybe the most honest thing that can be said is this: whatever happens after you die, something is happening right now. You are conscious. You are aware. You are reading these words, and somewhere behind them, something is registering their meaning, is moved or provoked or curious or unsettled, and that something, whatever it is the thing the question is really about. Science can describe the brain that produces it. Religion can describe what it hopes awaits it. Physics can describe what happens to the matter that contains it. But what it actually is, that inner light of experience, that felt sense of being alive, remains the deepest mystery the universe has produced. And maybe the fact that you can ask the question at all is the most remarkable part of the story.